This is Look West, a podcast from California's Assembly Democrats.
Hello, Look West. I am Maria Nider, and I'm here again with my colleague, Jen Hardy. Hi, Jen. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. And today we're actually talking, Jen is going to tell us all the good stuff that she learned and some of the sad stuff that we are going to be listening to, but in a good way, about some issues happening across the nation, but in particular in some areas that are really important for a community that we support here in California and that we're proud to be a part of and representing them in the legislative arena at the very least. So Jen, why don't you tell us a little bit about this episode?
Definitely. So I felt very privileged to be able to be a part of this episode. And we're talking about trans rights today, especially as they pertain to trans youth. And unfortunately, a lot of the countries decided to make this into a political issue instead of making sure that kids just get the care that they need and healthcare and love that they need. And so we were very honored to have Assemblymember Alex Lee and Mayor Lisa Middleton on our podcast to talk about this issue. And they do such a good job of talking about it that I'm going to let them take it away.
I'm Assemblymember Alex Lee. I have the great distinction of representing the California's 25th Assembly District in the Bay Area, and I'm also the first openly bisexual state legislator. Today, I'm going to have a conversation with Lisa Middleton, who is a pioneer in her own right. She is currently the mayor of Palm Springs and also the first trans elected to a non-judicial judicial seat, and has done a lot of visibility and done issue work in this area. And I think it's especially relevant to talk to Lisa today because of what's happening in the country right now. We're seeing a lot of weaponization against trans youth, against trans families, especially in red states, where they are trying to, well, for better lack of word, they're really reactionary politicians trying to put a wedge between our communities to stoke fear and get votes. It's an old trick in the book, and especially the LGBT community, we're always been used as some sort of fodder or some sort of boogie person, and that's unacceptable. But in California, we do something entirely different. So hopefully other states can learn from us, and hopefully we can also be doing a lot more to protect and welcome trans families. But I also want to welcome Lisa Middleton, who is openly trans as well and a great advocate for the community. And Lisa, do you want to introduce yourself for a second? And we'll have I'm sure, a very spirited discussion about what's going on in the country.
Certainly. Assemblymember, it's an honor to be with you today, and my appreciation to the California State Legislature that has set the mark for legislatures around the country in terms of supporting and defending the transgender residents and citizens of our state. Have been out as transgender since the early 1990s, and very proud to be a member of this community. And in 2010, my wife and I thought we had retired to Palm Springs, California, but Palm Springs had other ideas for us, and through a collection of work in neighborhood organizations and then time on the Palm Springs Planning Commission, I was fortunate enough to be elected to the City Council in Palm Springs in 2017. And with that election, our City Council that had been a majority LGBTQ for nearly 2 decades became the first city in the United States to be all LGBT. And I'm particularly proud that we had the L, the G, the B, and the T covered among the 5 members of our City Council. In 2020, I ran for re-election and ran unopposed. And I've been telling all of my friends since then, I am willing to run against nobody anytime. And in December of last year, and we rotate our mayors here in Palm Springs among everyone on City Council, I had the honor of being sworn in as mayor of the city of Palm Springs, becoming only the 3rd transgender person in the history of our country to be the mayor of an American city. What has been particularly gratifying is how many times as I'm walking around town, somebody will pull me aside and say, I'm really proud that you're our mayor. That feels good because they probably wouldn't be doing it if they didn't think we were doing a relatively good job. But it also says something about our community and our commitment to diversity, to inclusion, to equity.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure there are very few cities in the entire country that could even say they are near a majority at all of having a majority or near majority of LGBTQ council members. What do you feel like that has enabled you to, or what results has come from that level of representation that's unprecedented so many places in the country?
It has given us exposure. Certainly, the brand of Palm Springs is one that has been known worldwide, going back for now nearly 100 years, dating back to the times when so many folks from Hollywood found Palm Springs to be a place that they like to visit. AARP has identified Palm Springs as being the preeminent place for LGBTQ seniors to retire to. I keep inviting them to come and to visit, but remind them that we still need their votes in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Florida. So maybe a part-time residence might be good.
Well, that's certainly definitely still need people's solidarity and their activism in other states, but we certainly welcome them to come to California, of course, and to beautiful places like Palm Springs. I was just thinking, even in my district of over 500,000 people, I think I only have one council member who's openly out. One out of 5 cities. So we have some work to do up here as well. And on the topic of welcoming folks to California, how do you think California in the scope of our history, our recent history, and especially with our LGBT community, where we have faced different trials and tribulations and persecutions, where are we now in this point of history? How do you feel the attack on trans youth and using that as wedge issue now compares to previous iterations of when, like I alluded to, people would use us as a boogie person? How do you feel that stacks up to those times?
It's difficult to take and compare the struggle that one generation, one group of people have compared to another. I grew up in a community, working class community in East Los Angeles, and there were, at that time in the 1950s and 60s, so many individuals who had fled Jim Crow South. And the discrimination that they faced was life-threatening and life-ending in far, far too many situations. We have seen over and over again examples of groups of people being targeted for who they are. And that has happened, as we know, clearly in California. But as California swings back and forth, I think we are an example of a state and a community that consistently swings back towards values of inclusion. And I believe that has made us stronger as a state, both in terms of the economy, but in terms of those values make a difference in people's lives. And I'm native born California, and I'm very proud to be in this state. And one of the stories that I like to tell, when I was running for city council the first time, was doing a fundraiser like we all do as we're running for political office. And part of the event that evening was a reception line where I could shake hands and say thank you to all of the individuals who had come to the reception. And about halfway through that line, a little girl about 5 years old a little bit shy, put her hand out to me and said, hello, I'm Lori. I'm like you. I'm transgender. And my heart still sinks a little bit. Now that was 2017. So she's about 10, 11 years old today. And the kinds of actions that are being taken in so many states today would be directly affecting her. And as it turned out, when I spoke with her incredibly proud parents later in the evening, they had moved to California because they knew that it would be in California, not the state they had come from, where their daughter would have a chance to go to school and participate fully as who she was, and that the best chance for their family, for their child, was here in California. I can go on, but
and I think that's sorry, Lisa, not to cut you off, but I think that's like an important point that I kind of want to stress for people if they're listening who don't have as many lived experiences or even secondary experiences with trans folks, or even in the LGBT community in general. Is, you know, something I see a lot about is, and especially a tactic of the political right, is they use on its face kind of safe seeming things, right? It's about sports, sport competitions, bathrooms. Well, now they've kind of just go full mask off, right? They just persecute people, but they usually use something that's quite innocent on its face. But how can you describe a little bit like how these things, while they seem innocent, are actually very destructive to trans families or individuals?
Imagine the heartache that's going on in homes in Texas and Missouri and other states today, where you have a family with a transgender child. You know, perhaps their connections to the state they are living in are recent, or perhaps their connections are generational, going back, and they have now a child that they want to stand up for and do what any strong, good parent wants to do: give their child the greatest opportunity to grow up and realize their dreams and to determine their reality. And now the state is stepping in and trying to tell you how to raise your child, telling you what health care is appropriate and not appropriate to your child, not because medical practitioners have said this is what you should or should not do, because of elected officials with no medical training other than what they have picked up on Facebook in the last hour and a half, are making decisions for other people's lives. And as I like to describe that, imagine the dynamics in a household with a transgender child, a brother and sister who perhaps are not, a mother, a father, grandparents, all of them having to make decisions as to what we are going to do in our lives, and where are we going to go. So yeah, I'm an elected official. I've run for office. I know that you run for office trying to win races and campaigns and make your stand on your issues. But there are real people that are at stake here. This is not about changing the trajectory of how somebody else is living their life. And it's feeding into a very false and destructive narrative that somehow or another being transgender or gay or lesbian or bisexual is a choice that people make. And if only we make that choice less attractive for them, then they won't make it. Well, we've tried that with laws against gay men and lesbians expressing their love for one another for hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. Those laws never, ever worked, and they never will. You cannot change who a human being is. We know in our soul who we are. And I like to tell some of my friends, particularly from the South. My parents came to California as small children from Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl. I grew up in an evangelical Pentecostal household. All those prayers you say I should have prayed that would change me, I prayed. It didn't work. It's not going to work. What does work is being honest and truthful about who you are.
Yeah, certainly. And I really hope that there are folks who can look at our example in California and also reflect upon themselves to not be carrying on the centuries-old tradition of going after us just for cheap votes or cheap attention. And that's really saddening what we're doing. I mean, it's just despicable. And I think it's feeding off of this trend where, even though we see in California, we have a lot of progress, right? We finally overturned Prop 8. We have legalized and mainstream acceptance, for the most part, of the LGBTQ community. And then you have this reactionary thing where they latch onto these smaller issues, right? About whether it's about healthcare, quote unquote, right? Or it's about the bathrooms, or it's about sports. They always find something to try to latch onto, try to wedge people apart. And that's really the division of hate, right? And I am always very inspired by your journey as well. And certainly you might not be able to tell from our voices, but we have a different historical context in which we find ourselves in the LGBTQ advocacy world, right? Where this is, to me, I guess the second generation struggle. Or the first was just mainstream legalization of gay marriage. That was when I was in high school. And now we're going through this wave of, it seems, attack on trans lives and just finding little things for the right can grab on. But for your sake, you've been around longer, and you've been in this fight longer than I have, which is amazing, because for you to pioneer these fights and have these fights was allowing folks like me to come in. Like, that's how our community works, right? We break the glass ceilings, and exponentially our growth will keep growing. But I always wanted to ask you, is what do you feel like is one of the hardest challenges as an openly trans elected official? Do you feel there's been any specific challenges you've experienced as a trans individual, and how have you overcome that?
My heroine growing up was the late Congresswoman Barbara Jordan from Texas, who broke so many barriers for the African American community, and really only barely came out as a lesbian just before she passed away. Grew up in a very, very different era. But the great columnist Molly Ivins, in her obituary of Barbara Jordan, said, "It's easy to find her. She's the first and only." So most of the time when I go somewhere, I'm the first and only. But that's going to change. It's changing already across the country. We've got some wonderfully talented people who are members of the transgender community who are holding elected office. On the morning that I was elected to the Palm Springs City Council, there were 7 members of the transgender community that were holding elected office. And when I went to sleep that evening, the number had grown to 15. That's still 15 out of 340 million people. We've got a ways to go. But I look across and we see transgender city council members in places like Wheeling, West Virginia. We see a state senator in Delaware, a Assemblymember in Colorado who ran in a very purple, very competitive district and was reelected. So things are changing for us. And what's really important is, in some respects, the right wing that is targeting transgender individuals are prodding and pushing transgender people to step up and to provide our voice in opposition. I adore all of our allies. We could not be where we are today, but for the allies within the larger LGBTQ community. But from time to time, it is absolutely necessary for somebody who has the lived experience to be able to challenge what is being said about us, and to be the example of why what is being thrown out in these states is simply not true.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's important to uplift voices like yours and incredible public service you've had, especially as we are hopefully set to recognize Trans, Gender Nonconforming, and Intersex Awareness Month at the end of this month in March. And Senator Scott Wiener and the rest of the LGBT caucus, including myself, we have just recently unveiled legislation to protect trans youth across the country and to make sure that California won't abide by basically witch hunts, right? They want to come to other states and hunt down people for their gender affirming care, but we have to step it up. And I'm hoping that eventually this sense of urgency and this sense of justice is also extended to the federal level, of course, and of all these other states. Because if we don't have more people like us with their lived experience, if we saw this too in other government decisions, we are an afterthought. If we aren't the ones primarily making decision making, we get left out of these things. People forget about our own lived experiences. People forget about what need to be done to meet our community, or where we need to meet our community to make sure that health, even basic things like healthcare and housing, are met. We need to have those lived experiences in it. So that's why it's important to uplift your voice in this process too. So I think the last thing I want to ask you about is what gives you hope these days? What gives you hope that tomorrow will be a better day for LGBTQ community?
Great question. And I do have hope. The individuals I encounter across this state in particular, but truly across the country, who are revulsed by what they see and hear in states such as Texas, that gives me hope. The kinds of laws that are being passed, the people I encounter give me hope. Last few days ago, I flew up to Sacramento for board meetings at CalPERS, where I'm on that board. The individual I met at the TSA gate, when I handed her my ID, her eyes got really big and she said, "Are you Lisa Middleton?" I said, "Yes." And then she said, "I'm transgender."
Oh.
Now, I've met a lot of TSA agents over the course of the years, but that simple little encounter of meeting someone happened again today during lunch with our hospitality association. A woman walks up to me. She's recently in town, has a long career in the movie industry, and is here to build a transgender film festival in Palm Springs. So
that's awesome.
What gives me hope, and I referenced CalPERS. When I came out and when I transitioned as an employee of the state of California, my health care was specifically banned. A couple of years ago, I'm sitting at a committee meeting at CalPERS, and I am listening not to talk of banning transgender health care, but the chief medical officer for CalPERS describing the work that she's doing to build a medical network of individuals who are experienced and talented in providing transgender health care, so that anyone who's covered through CalPERS is transgender is not just going to simply have the legal right to health care, but most importantly, will actually have a culturally competent physician who wants to provide them the care that they need. We've got a long way to go.
We have a long way to go, but we've come a long way as well, Lisa.
We have.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your incredible public service. Thanks for being on this episode of the podcast where I am improvising as a host. But as we ask other states to look west to California and our progress and hopefully emulate it, we're also looking out east, right, for all our siblings in the community. And if they ever want to come here, learn more about us, or move here even, they should definitely do that. But thanks so much again for being on. Again, I'm Assemblymember Alex Lee, and we just heard from Lisa Middleton, the mayor of Palm Springs, also serves on CalPERS board, which I forgot, sorry, and also an excellent out and trans individual who's advocating for our community. So thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to Assemblymember Alex Lee and Palm Springs Mayor Lisa Middleton. Maria?
And thank you to our listeners, to this Look West audience, for your time. Don't forget to follow us on the Assembly Dems Instagram account and Twitter and TikTok to get more updates on other episodes coming your way. Till next time.
The Look West podcast is produced by the California Assembly Democrats. When you think of Californian politics, remember to look west.